were prosecuted and exiled from Germanic states and Spain. The first Belarusian Holocaust took place in 1654 and lasted until 1667. Tsar Alexis attacked the RP and left the country destitute. His army burned the population and enriched his tsardom with millions of capable captives. The Russian Empire occupied most of the GDL and RP territory during the partitions of 1772 that went through 1795. Russian imperial yoke launched the same serfdom in Belarus as they had in Russia proper since 1592. The entire population of different origins and faiths suffocated under the Russian imperial put. World War I and the revolutions brought about to Belarus the next Holocaust. The freedom came with the emergence of the Belarusian Democratic Republic, BNR. However, it was short-lived. At home, BNR was exiled from Belarus by the BSSR in 1920, but we shall remember that BSSR would not ever happen without a president of BNR. Conversely, three presidents of the BNR, including the current one, Madame Joanna Servila, have been Belarusian Canadians. Belarus was the first country hit by repressions as soon as Lenin's government lost the Soviet-Polish War in 1921. It lost a significant part of its historic territories. World War II brought in another Holocaust. No European country suffered more. Khrushchev so liberated most political prisoners, Belarusian farmers who existed under Stalin's serfdom, and brought some fresh air into the national culture. Chernobyl's consequences are still irreparable. The Belarusian Popular Front Odrojenie was a mass democratic movement supported by many in the 1980s. Independence and the new name came in 1991. The Republic of Belarus began democratic and economic reforms that ended with Alexander Lukashenko's elections in 1994. But it seems that currently he's trying to impose one more Holocaust-like action in Belarus. And I sincerely hope that he will fail. And my motherland will be able to return to democratic principles of BNR. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zina, for that rapid run through important history and putting an accent on the concerns that you have, personal concerns for democratic development in Belarus. Now let's turn to Valentina Holubeva. Valentina is a regular and active participant in Belarusian protests. She is involved in democracy building in Belarus and with an emphasis on producing equality and international cooperation. She runs international professional development projects for teachers of Belarus. And my sense is that she has a very close personal involvement, sort of a ground level view of some of the recent developments that we've seen in the country. Welcome, Valentina. Thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Edward. Thank you very much for inviting me to take part in this distinguished panel. I'm really honored. I'll try to be short. However, you probably can guess that I can tell you a lot of stories, like first-hand information. I'd like to start by thanking Dr. Gimpelevich for this very concise and general comprehensive overview of our history, because this sets an important background and enables us to understand what is happening here. Because over the 2 centuries under the Russian Empire and part of the Soviet Union, Belarusians were about to lose our national identity. And we somehow, when Russians ask us, so what's the difference? Sometimes we hesitate what to say. And this historic past, it actually explains the difference in our behavior, in our mentality, and our reluctance to fight physically for the freedom, because like it's so deep in our genes to build democracy and to solve it like in a peaceful manner and through involvement of the public. So probably I can tell you a little bit how these events developed this year. Unlike in the past periods, well, when Lukashenko came to power, people still thought that there would be some positive change, because Lukashenko is a great liar. He believes in everything what he is saying, and he sometimes is so convincing that you just you can't but believe. So he said that I'm going to raise Belarus. I will not lose, like let it go down, etc. However, with time, people started understanding, especially when he started killing his opponents. I'm not going to speak about that because you know this. And little by little, people were losing hope. So after several attempts to win presidential elections that failed, people started somehow living their own lives, everyone building their little niche where they felt comfortable, and so did I, and so did a lot of colleagues, etc. And the situation was going from bad to worse, like economy was failing. But this year it was different. This year we saw new names who challenged presidency, who declared their wish to run for presidency, such as Viktor Babarika, then Valery Tsepkalo, and before that, Sergei Tikhanovsky. And people like woke up and they looked at it, wow, we knew those people are capable of doing things, and people started waking up. So starting somewhere from May until August, all the nation was awakened. And the fight started at the moment of collecting signatures. Personally, I got involved in this because I personally knew Viktor Babarika, and I knew him as a good manager. He founded one of the best banks in Belarus, and I knew how they were working. It was just they organized scientific conferences, art events, etc. So I was confident that he would be able to build a new country, and so did other people. We started selecting signatures, and surprise, surprise, Viktor Babarika collected 420,000 instead of the required 100. So it was a shock to everyone, and this is why Lukashenko started, like he put him and his son to prison, he ruined the bank, etc. So, and somehow Tikhanovsky was put to jail before the submission time for his will to participate, so Svetlana registered. And then, you know, the developments, probably I'm going to skip this part. And I'm prepared to answer questions if any. But what is happening now? It's already, we are coming to the 3rd month of active protests, because what was happening before the election, there were some fights, but they were not so numerous and not so active. So every Sunday, it's already going to be the 12th Sunday, from 100,000 to 200,000. Nobody knows exact number, because like what they count from the drones, it's only part of the process, but some people come early, some people leave. Besides, we do not count drivers, motorists who block the roads, who pick up people after the march and bring them to safety. We do not count people who wave their flags from the windows and make videos and then paste them online. We actually don't know how many people are involved, but this number, like about more than 100,000, that's an impressive number, and we had never seen that before this summer. So it's impressive how people woke up and united, and people show a lot of solidarity. Somebody asked me about like concerns. The greatest concern, and probably it's our strength and our weakness at the same time, is that there is no one leader who would organize it. People organize themselves because we have grown a new generation here, and people organize themselves, and they get together, they know themselves what to do. But the absence of clear plan, it's a little bit puzzling, and we do not feel comfortable. We don't know how far we can go with this. I mean to say, we are going to go until we win, but how far the way is going to be, that remains unknown. So probably my 5 minutes are over.
Thank you so much, Valentina. Those are terrific terrific comments that add much from the ground level. And we know that you have many more observations that are informed by a ground level view. It is interesting that I don't think anyone has yet mentioned Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, although we did hear Tikhanovsky, or maybe I missed it. But in any case, your point about there being this being a movement without a particular leader is an interesting one, and it does speak to sort of the power of the mass mobilization, even if in the West, especially through the media, we tend to personalize the struggle through the person of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Okay, thank you very much again. So now we're going to turn to Andrei Kazakiewich. Andrei, if you're there, you can turn on your video. We are delighted to have you. You're the director, as you know, of the Institute of Political Studies, Politichная Sfera in Minsk. Andrei has a PhD in political science, where his thesis dealt with judicial power in the Republic of Belarus. A wide range of interventions, both scholarly and more practical. Be great to hear your perspectives as well. Thanks, Andrei, for being part of this panel.
Thank you very much for possibility to speak here. I would like to say several words concerning Belarusian political system. Just I think it's could help to clarify and to understand deeper the situation in Belarus. We have, for 25 years, we have consolidated authoritarian regime. And the characteristic feature of this regime is that we don't have any strong political institutions except bureaucracy. It means that in Belarus there is no any strong political parties, pro-governmental or oppositional. There are no any strong civil society organizations, pro-governmental or oppositional, and there are no any other strong political institutions except bureaucracy, which is strictly centralized, which is controlled by Alexander Lukashenko as a strong man. That's why we have that kind of crisis. For instance, at the moment we have very strong protest movement, but this protest movement doesn't have any mechanisms to change power directly. I mean, it's impossible to use representative bodies like parliament or local councils. There is no possibility to use local elites or probably some other institutions. And the only strategy that was possible and what is being used by a protest movement is just push pressure on the authorities by protests and to make these protests long term, not like several demonstrations, then change in power, but long-term protests, long-term pressure on the authorities. And this strategy is more or less successful, as already the system has considerably changed, and authorities and Lukashenko are not able to stabilize the situation by force. They have to find any political solution, but at the moment they are not willing to do this political solution, or they are not ready for any negotiations or dialogue with alternative political forces, unfortunately. Speaking about the question that was expressed in the title of this event, will Belarus be a democracy? I think that the possibility that it will be a democracy is rather high, because authorities are in a very difficult situation. Except political crisis, there is a deep economic crisis in Belarus. The economic situation is really bad. There is a crisis of foreign policy. The Western dimension of foreign policy of Belarus was practically ruined by oppressions, which were implemented by the authorities. Relationships with Russia are strained, and it's difficult to say that they are normal. And actually, Russia promotes constitutional reform in Belarus, and probably replacement of Lukashenko in some time. And there are many other problems. So in general, I don't think that this political system will survive for long, and I think that it will be changed in a year or less, even. Yeah, probably in several months or something like this. It's difficult to predict how it will be changed and what kind of political system we will have after that. Because the scenario of authorities could be realized, probably some kind of national dialogue could be arranged between opposition and authorities, and probably some other scenarios are possible. But I think that we should expect considerable changes within the Belarusian political system, and I hope that this political system will be democratic. Thank you.
That's terrific. Thank you, Andrei. I think it's great to hear the sober but hopeful view of the prospects here. Obviously, this is the start of a very long road with many possible twists and turns, possible reversals, and so on. But creating robust, durable democratic institutions is it's not for the faint of heart, right? This is a long sort of process. Thank you very much for those insights. Finally, I want to welcome Igor Lescenia. Igor was the first senior diplomat to declare solidarity with protesters in Belarus. He was the ambassador of Belarus to Slovakia, and actually joined the diplomatic service in 1991 as an attaché of the embassy of the USSR. So quite a seasoned diplomat, but who has recognized the moment for what it is. Igor has also initiated the popular movement called I Am a Citizen. He has a much longer resume that I could go into, so I encourage those who are interested to have a look. But we look forward to hearing your perspectives on where we are, how we got here, and where we might be going. Welcome, Igor.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, good Canadian morning for everybody. It's a great honor for me to join this conference. First of all, definitely Belarus may be a democracy. Definitely, Belarus will be a democracy. But to understand how to reach this aim, I'd like to propose to single out three issues. First, we should make an assessment of the present situation. Second, we can try to understand the crisis trajectories. And third, of course, the influence of neighbors. There is a saying in Belarus that neighbor is a member of the family. Of course, each neighbor, and especially very big neighbor, without any doubts, he is a real member of the family. We have dealt and we deal with Belarus really with a very unique movement. It's really people's movement and the movement without definite leaders. And these circumstances influenced the situation. The matter is that none of so-called favorites during the electoral presidential campaign had the possibility to express to public his program. Nobody told definitely where he is going to lead this country. And by the way, this situation, such situation, it's one of the secrets why the government bureaucrats prefer to stay outside. In order to solve some issues, we should name these issues. We should deal with the realities, but very often we prefer to deal with something we imagine. Unfortunately, we even don't know exactly how many Belarusians really in favor of Lukashenko leaving. Of course, the majority. But what are the dimensions of this majority? We mostly are dealing with feelings, but feelings not with definite logics, with definite knowledge, and with definite understanding of the situation. But feelings are something which concerns romantic relationship, not it's not the issue of policy and it's not the issue of politics. We have one problem, very big problem, and we should understand this problem. I mean so-called quiet protest majority. I mean those peasants, those Belarusians who in reality are against Lukashenko, who supports the slogan for his living from at least from the policy, but who prefer to stay aside. I think that now when we've entered third month of protest movement, it's very important, but insufficient to try to attract people only by negative aims, by negative slogans. In Belarus, it's impossible to imagine that the slogan to leave from Belarus will work during the third month of protest. The movement against somebody and against something should be converted into the movement for something. People should see some positive, should see something, should feel something that may unite them, and it's very necessary. I'm sure it's one of the keys to the heart and to the mind of ordinary Belarusian. And I don't, I'm unable to see politician force any party, influential political party, which is trying to do this job. Recently, we've seen the ultimatum which was forwarded by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Let us to say sincerely, the real aim, not official, the real aim of this ultimatum was to encourage, to revive those 500 or 700 active protesters. Is it sufficient? We should speak about the majority of Belarusians. And of course, nationwide strike may be the best solution to force Mr. Lukashenko to speak. At a whole, 1 minute, yes? At a whole, I consider all of these activities, peace demonstrations, strikes, and other as different directions of enforcement for dialogue, and the legal activities, including my movement, may be a necessary additional way for this enforcement to speak with the best people. So as I guessed, I expired my 5 minutes, no? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that that everyone kept to their time. There's always more to say, especially in an ongoing and fluid sort of situation with an uncertain sort of endpoint here. So thanks, Igor, for your terrific comments. Before we do engage in a broader question and answer sort of session, I do want to emphasize that, you know, although Igor, for example, comes from the diplomatic side, although Zina and Andrei have academic backgrounds and so on, Valentina more of an activist kind of background. In a way, this panel is a bit emblematic of what Belarus, at least those in the streets, are experiencing now. There's a sort of horizontality that seems visible to the protest. That is to say, even a former diplomat is more or less the same as an activist, is more or less the same as an academic, right? And that's a sort of welcome facet, almost an internally democratic facet to the mass mobilization, with all the attendant challenges of converting that into something, as Igor said, a movement against something has to turn into a movement for something, and so that transition will be challenging going forward. Audience members, we see a couple of questions in the Q&A. Thank you for supplying those. I will raise those right now to the panelists, and we'll go around, and if any of the panelists want to go ahead and turn on your videos just so that everyone can see you again. We'll ask the questions, perhaps generally. Don't feel the obligation to answer every question, but if there's something that sparks your attention or your interest, please feel free to offer something. So let's go ahead and start with maybe the elephant in the room, which is Russia, the good neighbor, or the neighbor in any case, and the family member, right? And I guess the first question that came in is from John Allen. He says, there's a view that Russia will not allow free and fair elections. What is your view? Of course, all of our crystal balls are very, very cloudy, but nonetheless, I guess the question is, what is our sense about Russia's willingness to allow free and fair elections in the context of Belarus? And let me flip this around a little bit and ask the same question in a different way. Is it possible that Russia doesn't care if Belarus is a democracy or an autocracy, as long as its foreign policy is aligned with, and trade policy are aligned with Russia? In other words, does Russia really care about elections one way or another, set to the point where it might prevent those elections from happening, real elections, or is it indifferent as long as the foreign policy is aligned more or less with Russia? So that's a question, I suppose, for anyone who wants to answer it. So yeah, maybe raise your hand. Can we go ahead and start with Andrei for a minute, and then to Valentina?
I think that Russia really indifferent concerning the character of elections, and you are right that the main aim for Russia is to keep Belarus close, or at least to keep influence on Belarus at the same level as it is. And if we compare, for instance, different states that are closely that have close relations with Russia, for instance, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and even semi-recognized entities like Transnistria, Abkhazia, and so on. They more or less democratic or at least hybrid political regimes. Because for Russia, it's much easier to control a country with different institutions, different points of influence. And it's much more difficult to influence, a strong man that control the whole country and so on and so forth. So in general, I think that Russia more or less ready for democracy, or at least semi-democracy in Belarus. It's at least I see the situation like this.
Valentina, on this question?
So our relations with Russia, I mean to say, during this protest, they reached the peak before Lukashenko's going to Sochi, because like everyone was scared that Russia would bring troops into the country and just suppress everyone. But when it became obvious that Russia is not going to be involved openly and directly, people started somehow neglecting this issue. And actually, there is one video. Well, let me make a step back. So actually, everyone is thinking, like, when you do not see a clear objective, when you do not see a leader, we need somehow to organize ourselves. And everyone is trying to pursue our goals. And the goals are autonomy, number one, democracy, number two. And I have written in the chat, we have 3 slogans around which everyone unites. It's stop violence, number one, punish all those who are criminals who committed those horrific crimes. Number two, power transfer. And number 3, free political prisoners. This is what unites United Nations at the moment. We're not thinking about Russia as long as it stays apart, at least openly. Obviously, Russia is very much interested in influencing the processes, and we recognize that at the presidential elections, they will try to favor and to support somebody who is going to be pro-Russian. And as long as they do not threaten our autonomy, we do not care, because we don't want to make, to have an enemy next to it. We are connected with them. As long as they let us do what we want to do, it's fine. Speaking about like Russia's involvement, what they're going to do, so everyone is saying like this. There was some statement in the video, like imagine that there is no Nechta. Nechta is a Telegram channel which sends information to organizers. Imagine that there is no Tikhanovskaya. Are we going to stop? No. We're not going to stop. And Tikhanovskaya is supported because she is saying something which how to say, responds to in our hearts. She's saying some like clear, easy to understand things, doable things, okay? If she starts playing against the people, like she will be gone as others, I think. This is why Russia, it's better for Russia to stay away and then start building relations with someone who will come out when the time of elections come. That's my opinion.
Okay, terrific. I think I saw another hand. Did I see? Zina and then Igor.
We have to consider a fact. Actually, what kind of Russia we are talking about? Is it Russia is multifaceted? Are we talking about Putin's Russia or very strong democratic supporters in Russia that we have? I think that in a way, Putin is spooked because he might be in a very same position if God willing we win. And democratic Russia in this sense is very helpful to us.
Thank you, Igor.
Besides, once again, historically, Russia was very much interested in our territory for many reasons. And I think that Putin would be happy to bring his property back.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that, but before we turn to Igor, I just want to flag that. I mean, I guess the question is there some sense of claims based on some kind of common culture or common ethnicity that we saw at play in the Ukrainian example in 2014, right? Which ended up with the annexation of Crimea. That's a question that Kosalan, I won't try to pronounce your last name, apologies, asks, rightly so, in the Q&A. But before we get to that, Igor.
Okay, thank you. First of all, Russia is interested at least in preserving the current level of ties, the current level of dozens of thousands multi-level. Secondly, Russia is interested to have a predictable president after Mr. Lukashenko, who will be able to preserve this level. And third idea, the most important, any democratically elected new Belarusian president, if he does not want to be overthrown by his own Belarusian people in 6 months, would be doomed to pursue the policy of special ties with Russia. But, other words, the special ties, the policy of special relationship with Russia pursued by Mr. Babaryka, by Mr. Tsepkala, by Mr. Tikhanovsky, or by Mrs. Tikhanovskaya, definitely will differ with the same policy pursued by Mr. Lukashenko. And simultaneously, at the same time, he should do his best to have at least very good ties with the European Union, and it would be wonderful, very good ties with the United States. And if you allow me one idea concerning the competence of Zina. As ambassador, I was doomed to, very often, I was doomed to explain the specific of the situation in Belarus. One idea, if you imagine the virtual frontier, the virtual border between so-called West European civilization and between so-called East European civilization, this border lays just in the center of Belarus, just in the center of Ukraine. So we are doomed to be this prize for our big neighbors. And another idea, if you allow me, the sphere of Zina. If we imagine the history of Belarusians as a separate identity, national identity, from the time when they have begun to understand that they are not Polish, not Russians, the half of the history of Belarusians as a national identity, by 100%, they are west of Europe. West European sub-civilization. The other part of this history, by 100%, we are the East European civilization. It's my own perception, and it influences, and it will influence our history and our ties with neighbors. Thank you.
Great, that's great. Let's these are fascinating observations. I guess a natural next question might be, and maybe this links up to the potential analogy with Ukraine in 2014, or maybe the analogy is not a good one. And I would put that out to all the panelists. Is that analogy a good one? And if not, what might be some interesting differences there? And a related question that one might want to ask is, do we see political figures within the Belarusian context today making statements that seem to imply a fundamental choice between Europe and Russia? Or is that discourse absent, right? Because we saw that, I think, if my reading of the Maidan is accurate, we saw that polarization, right, in the discourse in the Ukrainian context. And I guess I wonder if we see echoes of similar polarization in the context of Belarus today or not. So who wants to take a stab at this? Valentina, and then Andrei.
Yeah. I don't see any.
Sorry, Andrei.
any...
Andrei, just a
sorry?
moment. Okay. I just wanted to give Valentina the word first because.
Okay. Sorry, Andrei. The point is, as I have already mentioned, we have much more important issues at the moment. Number one, it's stop violence, because like it's not safe. People are murdered. People like last Sunday they shot rubber bullets at people. People are beaten up. People are taken to jail, and this is number one. It's not time to discuss where are we going to go. We need peace to discuss it. Like, it's not the point. Speaking about parallels with Ukraine, I have some relatives in Ukraine, and they are saying, like, you're doing exactly what we are doing, what we were doing at that time. But I think there is a distinct difference. First of all, we are more homogeneous. We are not broken into regions like in Ukraine, Western Ukraine, Eastern Ukraine. Definitely our Western part is much more active, Eastern part is less active, but still we do not see ourselves like two different regions. This is number one. Number two, we have not started a war yet, and hopefully we will not start it. This is war in Ukraine started with annexation of Crimea and then two regions. We do not have this, and this is why we have not anti-Russian moods now at the moment. And as I have already said, as long as it's not Russia is not getting involved directly, so probably we'll have none. So I think these are two differences. And the third difference is probably the mentality. Ukrainians are more decisive. If you look at their parliament, they're fighting all the time. Belarusians are somehow, we just don't like to fight. Yeah, three differences on.
Thank you very much for that. Andrei, what's your take?
Yeah, I agree with Valentina. I don't see any real division, any real geopolitical divide in Belarus. And this issue is not important for most of protest movement because we have such aim as new elections, democracy, and so on.
Great. Igor, please.
Yes, of course, nevertheless of this Waterloo border, in any case, Belarus is preserved as one country. I agree with my colleagues that we will not face any split between East and the West. And the most important, the nature of specific ties between Russia and Belarus is other. I'm sure that Russia will not undertake any decision to make something which may be comparable with Donbass or with Crimea.
Fabulous. Okay. Zina, please, you have a thought.
Somehow we do not discuss a question of our culture and how different we are compared to Russian culture, which we all love. We were all educated on Russian great literature. Nevertheless, to me, it's a principal question. For many, many years, starting with Russian Empire, Belarusian culture was going through a Holocaust, really, once again. And somehow our council, led by Tikhanovskaya, is not talking about it much. And this is something that could have united us better than we are at the same time. Belarusian, what I was trying to say is that I don't want us to repeat BelNATE's mistakes, which they did with Belarusian language, which was rapidly imposed on Belarusians and brought a lot of disturbance into the unity. I would love us to follow Estonian example when they allowed people till who were as young as up to 55 years old, 10 years in order to learn the language of the country, and not to include people who were after 55. And that would be a good way for the council to unite us and to indicate into the importance of the culture. Just a comment.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be turning it over, the moderating role, to my colleague Robert Austin in just a minute. And so I'll ask one last question, and then I'll have to catch the rest of the conversation via the recording. So I look forward to and thank you in advance for the remainder of the session. My question for the panelists is this: here we are in 2020. Right, which is a peculiar kind of historical moment in a variety of ways, right? One can count them on, you know, your fingers and probably toes as well, right? So this is a very peculiar historical moment, and I guess I wonder, does that make a difference for the recent history that we've seen? Does 2020 play into? How is it different that it's happening now rather than, as Zina invokes the Estonian example, happening in the late 80s and early 1990s, right? Why does it matter that Belarus is experiencing this moment of democratic mobilization in 2020 versus at other historical moments when other countries experienced it? Or does it matter? So I'll leave that open to you. And again, I want to thank Robert for taking over the moderating, and thanks again to the panelists. I look forward to hearing your answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Edward.
Thank you. Andrei, do you want to go ahead and start us off?
2020 is really different. And in comparison, for instance, with the beginning of 90s, now we have much deeper political mobilization. And the attitude, or the political crisis is much deeper if we speak about attitude to authorities, because in the beginning of 90s, more or less population was loyal to Communist Party, to Soviet political system, to Soviet economy, and absolute majority was not very active. Of course, there was a very important point for Belarusian national movement, and Belarusian Popular Front was created, and this organization was very active politically. But it's about probably 25–30% of population supported this organization. The rest were more or less loyal to the system that was created during Soviet times. And now this situation is different, as the absolute majority of people just don't like the political system. They dislike the leader, Alexander Lukashenko. And they want rights, they want democracy, and they are active, and they are ready to struggle for a long time for such values. And this is the first time in Belarusian history, as far as I understand. Why? It's very difficult to say. I think that a great number of research should be conducted to understand these phenomena. Probably the main reason or the main cause of such situation is that Belarusian society greatly changed, and now only a half of Belarusian economy is under state control, for instance. We have a great number of people which are not associated with the state, with state or governmental institutions. Informational sphere or informational communication changed dramatically, and now it's much easier to build horizontal connections or horizontal relations between people and regions that it was 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. But of course, it's not so easy to explain why we have this situation now in 2020, because it should be evaluated and should be investigated much deeper than just to analyze some evident things like state policy, like pandemic in the beginning of this year, like fake elections and so on. I think that the reasons are much more deeper. That's all probably.
Sorry, everybody, I was muted. Good morning, everybody from Toronto. And thank you. I'm Robert Austin, as you all know. Valentina, I saw your hand up there, so I'm going to turn it over to you. And again, let's keep it pretty open. And I see Igor's hand too. So over to you, Valentina.
Okay, thank you, Robert. First of all, I would like to align with Andrei in that the reasons are like go deep. Probably we have grown a new generation. We have been working towards forming new generation, free from fears, free from this slavery in the minds. And they have already taken some managerial positions. They started new businesses and they learned managerial style. So we have a force, but catalyst for that was first these secret negotiations with Russia. They kept it secret for half a year, and in December there were protests against this unknown deeper, what they call deeper integration with Russia. So people were already angry, and then the culmination happened in COVID pandemic when it was obvious that the government failed to work, and public society suddenly discovered that we can live without this government, which proved to be useless, and people started believing in themselves. And then like it started developing, and then there was a problem with water supply when again the government failed to provide clear water, and people were helping each other. So we understood that we can do things without the government, and and definitely Lukashenko was not prepared. Actually, everything what he was doing was just missing the target. If somebody wrote him a worst case scenario, then it would not be as bad as it happened for him. Like he made so many mistakes, like it was horrifying. Thank you.
Go for it. Again, good morning again from Toronto.
Okay, it's possible, yeah. If we follow the way of comparison, it's very interesting to compare 2020 with 1990. 30 years ago, the wave of movement for national self-determination swept the former Soviet Union. And Belarusians were not among the most active players in this movement. And very often we were doomed to state that we've received our independence by chance. Now, 30 years later, we face very interesting phenomenon. First, we face the birth of really serious civil society in Belarus. And on some occasion, there is a very strict, very evident link between the birth of really numerous civil society and the interest to the national symbols. I mean, why the red, white flag of Belarus? This flag becomes a symbol of the becomes symbolic for hundreds of thousands of protesters. And sincerely, I was very impressed from the very beginning. I questioned myself, maybe it's like a fashion, maybe 1 month later, 2 months later, we'll face not at least changes of flags, but it will be left aside. So it's very interesting. So Belarusians as a nation now are becoming adult, as a nation of civil society. It's very interesting, the connection between those two phenomena. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Igor. And Valentina, I want to come back to your point about 2020 and some other points made. You know, one thing that's become clear in 2020 is authoritarian leaders don't manage crisis well. And this is really important because when you look at these guys, the authoritarians are the ones who have mishandled it, because authoritarians can only manage crises that they invent.
Yes.
Yeah,
You know,
at least one blessing.
Yeah.
And just
go on. I'm just going to say, so that's what Zina said. In a crisis like we're in right now, I constantly look for these silver linings. And one of them is authoritarians, particularly look at Hungary, for example. Total catastrophe in COVID, you know, after saving Hungarians from all these invented crises, George Soros, migrant crisis, I can go on, but that's too much. But I want to bring it back, and I've had some notes from some colleagues. I have some more questions. But one of the things I'm interested in, because as some of you probably know, I'm not a specialist by any means on Belarus, and I had to educate myself for this, and I've certainly taken away a lot from the conversation already this morning. But can you say a little bit more, because this is something I've noticed about the role of women in the mobilization and the kind of inspirational role that women are playing in what's happening in Belarus, because I think that that's a really important dimension. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. And because Valentina's there, right, Valentina?
Okay, thank you very much, Robert.
With Valentina.
Yeah, so it happened. So yes, the women became the face of the leaders. They were 3 women were leaders, so their faces became the symbol of protest. And then if you look at the streets, you can see mostly women. Well, the reason for that is that the police is exceptionally brutal against men. They're beaten up to death, they're injured and whatever. So after the 3 days of severe fights, the 9th, the 10th and the 11th of August, when the government, I mean the security forces and Lukashenko regime and the government, they were all involved. I think they were horrified by what they did, because over 3 days they detained up to 8,000 people. So people were taken to cells in the detention center, like 40, 20, 60 people into a cell for 4 people. And there were 450 cases when people were badly injured. So they were horrified. And then the change was like women started walking in the streets and to stop violence, calling for stop of the violence. And still now, when we go on marches, women are detained. Sometimes women are beaten too, but not that severely as men are, because like you can see from the videos, okay, sometimes they can push a woman, they can threaten with a gun, but when they capture a man, they are beaten with they kicked, they are boxed, they are just, it's horrible, it's just horrifying. Yeah, a lot of men talk about more like start fighting and actually start using weapons. But the point is that, as I have already mentioned, we just don't want to, I'm quite sure that some people who are present here just as listeners today would disagree. But the point is that if you're calling for violent action against the regime, who's going to do that? I'm not going to do that. Women are not going to do that. So if people who have weapons, army or security forces, if they decide to do that, so nobody is going to stop them. But normal people have no weapons, so what can we do? like throwing stones. Some people threw stones last Sunday, so they were bullets. So for this reason, we have no other way until a miracle happens and somebody does what has to be done. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Igor, Andrei, Zina, you want to add anything there? Thank you so much, Valentina. No? Okay. Okay. Listen, Valentina, really appreciate the on-the-ground perspective. I'm looking at the Q&A, you know, because we've got some really good questions, and I know where I want to end up at the end, which is to talk about, you know, where we are now and what's ahead in terms of dialogue, what has to happen to make, you know, to make Belarus a democracy, and the optimism here is obvious. But let me go to the Q&A, and then there's a couple of questions that I think you'll all enjoy speaking to. The first question, actually from a former student of mine, and a very fine young man, in fact, a local journalist here in town. Can we look to Armenia's Velvet Revolution as an indicator of how Russia might behave towards a democratic movement in one of its allies, or are the two countries far too different? So this is along the lines, what I was saying is like, where do you draw your inspiration from? I heard Estonia mentioned, et cetera, but how do you situate what's happened in Armenia with what may or may not happen in Belarus? And I think the first person I'm going to go to Igor, as the former diplomat. I think that you should get us going, Igor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure that we will not face such crises, such events like in Armenia. Previously, I mentioned, of course, there is a definite link. There are dozens of thousands of links between Belarus and Russia. And without any doubt, there is very evident issue. Events in the mass movement in Belarus may influence some way any movements, may influence some way Russia, may influence some Russian politicians, some individuals, some political parties, and even Russian people, and that is a problem for the Kremlin. But proceeding from the very special history of Russia and Belarus, proceeding from the very special integration process of the last 25 years, it's unbelievable that Russia will make some invasion or something like this. The matter is that we have not the state. The process, very long, protracted process of building so-called union state. Of course, it includes a lot of dangers, but it's unbelievable to imagine that one part of so-called union state invading another part. So in any case, Russia, if we speak about the present Russian leadership, if we speak about Mr. Putin, maybe about his possible successor, if he will be from the same team, of course, they will do their best to preserve the influence. They will try to find definite persons, definite movements to rely upon them. And of course, they will rely upon these very special packages of special ties. So I don't think that we will see in Belarus something like something which is happening now in Caucasus.
Thank you. And Andrei, you want to jump in there? I see your hand there. Go for it.
Yes, probably the main difference between Belarus and Armenia, as I see, is that actually Armenian crisis was solved domestically as a result of some kind of negotiations and a deal between opposition and authorities. And it seems that this scenario is just impossible in Belarus. Any negotiations are possible only as a result of external mediation, because there is a lack of trust between between political entities in Belarus, and there are no any mechanisms to guarantee fulfillment or guarantee of any deals or any results of negotiations. That's why I think that external influence on the solution of Belarusian crisis will be much greater. And actually, we can see this now, because, for instance, Russia promotes constitutional reform in Belarus. At the same time, Belarusian authorities are trying to postpone this reform just to ignore any dialogue with these other political forces and political entities. And the only reason why they have to do this constitutional reform, they have to negotiate, or not negotiate, but to be in communications with some oppositional political forces, is external pressure. EU, Russia, United States, all foreign powers are promoting some kind of political changes and national dialogue in Belarus. And it wasn't the case for Armenia.
Very true. But we don't see, you know, I don't know, I come at this as a historian, so maybe I better let it go, because I'll end up, you know, talking too much. But I'm also generally a glasses half full person, but I'm going to go to the audience question. But Igor, I want to mention something that you said earlier, because I'm also a fan of these sayings. And you mentioned that, you know, a neighbor is a family member. You know, when you live in Canada, you know, especially at this moment, it's hard to accept that, but fine, I'll leave it at that. But I also prefer the saying, which is more of a Turkish saying, which is something like, don't choose your house, choose your neighbors, which is also really relevant, because, you know, lots of countries rewrite their history all the time, but it's really difficult to change your geography. And I think that's the factor that kind of looms over all of this, is geography. When I think of geography, I think of Georgia, I think, of course, of Ukraine, et cetera, which have had, you know, real challenges. And that's why I'm a little bit hesitant to embrace the democratization agenda. But having said that, and this I think is something for all of you, because I'm staying in touch with Natalia Smelyuk, who's one of the key organizers of this, among other things, you know, very active in the Belarusian Canadian Alliance, and she guides me a little bit to understand what are the best questions to ask all of you. And then I saw something in the chat box too, which I thought about, and bring it back to like right now. Like, what has to happen to get the, you know, the president, in quotation marks, to the negotiating table? Because he's not at the negotiating table. So what has to happen? That really interests me. Like, what has to happen in the next, you know, days, weeks, months, you know, to move this ahead. All right. And I saw Valentina, because again, she's our, you know, on the ground person right now, but so is Andrei and so is Igor. But Valentina, you start, and then I'll
Okay.
there.
Thanks, Robert. We are running out of time already. I will try to be short. One of the forces that is definitely involved is Mr. Putin. And we all strongly believe if he calls Lukashenko and says, so it's time for you to go, he would go, because that's the only support he's receiving at the moment. And I would like to make a point, speaking about Russia-Belarusian relations. I can't draw parallels with Armenia, but it's not secret that we watched their videos about this Velvet Revolution, and we're trying to follow, because they succeeded without violence. So we hope that we will succeed too. Speaking about the relations between Russia, I appreciate the point made by Zina that what are we talking about? Are we talking about Putin's Russia or Russia as a different, like as a country with culture, with democratic rules? Because they want to get rid of this anti-democratic rule also. And we can see that happening in Khabarovsk, and we chant, hello Khabarovsk, they send hello to us. So, the point is that the initial relations between Lukashenko and Putin were all corrupted. We don't know exactly what was happening, but it was so disparaging. It was so we feel ashamed for that. It was shameful relations because they were bargaining all the time. They were quarreling that they would make in a deal, that they quarrel about money. We are a civilized country. We have so many smart people, businesses, and we can build healthy relationship with Russia. And we would like Putin to hear that. So why are you keeping that man who is actually insane, who is doing this horrific things to his own people? Actually, he's raging a war. Let's call a spade a spade. It's a war, okay? Shooting at people, what is it? Like you can be arrested for everything. Like even if you do not have a flag, you can be wearing red and white, and that's enough to stop you and arrest you. So what is this? So if Putin is wise enough, and if you have any channels to bring this message to him, like let him open his eyes and see that new Belarusians who are fighting for democracy is going to be a much better partner. We're going to have to build healthy relations. And probably he is the one who can influence the situation. Thank you.
But he didn't call Yanukovych. He didn't call on the Ukrainian leader to step down, and he was just as insane and just as diabolical. But that's a different point, okay, Valentina?
I'm not a politician to comment on this.
Yeah, no, I hear you, but I just, I'm just throwing that out there. Zina, Andrei, Igor's got his hand up first, so I'm going to go to Igor. Please, Igor.
Okay, thank you. Really, from the first glance, it's very difficult to imagine that Mr. Lukashenko is able to hold talks, is able to recognize somebody as a partner for talks. But the matter is that there is no one recipe for the success. And I prefer to consider everything which happens. I mean, peace protesters, attempts to make strikes, even the activity of Belarusian cyber partisans, but nevertheless the partisans, influence of the history, the activity of legal movements, the influence of Mr. Putin, of course, the influence of the Western state of economy. I prefer to consider all of these aspects as different directions of enforcement for dialogue. And we have one more very important event. We mentioned, of course, that the whole bureaucracy loyal now are loyal to Mr. Lukashenko. They remain to be loyal to him. But there is one very important change. Previously, all those bureaucrats, they were dependent on Mr. Lukashenko. Now, mostly Mr. Lukashenko is dependent on them, because previously he was able to demonstrate mass support from the support of majority of the people. Of course, there were discussions, there was a quarrel, and everybody previously, and everybody understood that if he won elections with 80%, everybody doubled, but almost everybody was sure that at least that he had at least 55 or maybe 60. So now this situation changed drastically. So I think the composition of all these influences may have some effect. And now it sounds very strangely, but as a diplomat, I believe in talks, and I believe that at some level of development of the situation, the enforcement to hear people and to listen to people will succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Andrei, Zina's got her hand there from Zina. I'm going to go to Zina, then Andrei, and that might get us pretty close to 11:30 and time to say thanks and carry on. Zina, please.
I think that a very important point we didn't talk about yet is change in demography in Belarus. And in here, I'm following in footsteps of Valentina, Vale, Igor, and Andrei. Presently, 80% of Belarusians are city dwellers. And this is used to be an agrarian country, well familiar to, what's his name, Lukashenko. And today, we are having a different situation. It's easier for people to keep kind of civilized rules. And honestly speaking, once again, people are much better educated about everything, starting with our history and up to today's day. So there is hope because of that, I think.
Thank you, Zina.
I'm done.
Thank you, Zina. I appreciate that. I like your optimism, Zina. And I'm a historian too.
And the thing is, looking at Canadian diaspora, as you know, how much is done for putting Belarus back on the world map, you will see people who are united by love for their motherland and respect to each other. We are all happy to be Canadians, but we remember where we came from.
Andrei, what's next? That's our question. Back to that. What's next?
The question was about changes and negotiations and Lukashenko.
How does it? What's next? How do you get Lukashenko to the table?
Yes, I think that the simplest answer would be pressure. Concerning external pressure, I think that some kind of general approach between European Union and Russia should be deliberated concerning Belarusian case, and this will be the solution of our crisis. Concerning internal pressure, it's just a continuation of long-term protests. I don't see any other mechanism to change this system, and I think that this pressure will force Lukashenko to negotiate, or more probably not Lukashenko, but authorities in general.
Thank you very much. So what I'm going to do right now, because it's 11:26, and I know that everybody's got the things to do, just to give you folks in Europe an update. The weather's not so bad here. It's sunny. It's about 9 degrees. We're heading into winter here, and it's going to be a difficult winter, as you know, because the situation with the virus has not been great. But I have to say Canada's done rather well. For those of you who follow it, I'm talking specifically to our friends in Europe right now. Having said that, I think today we started a great conversation, and something that is important for all of us is to keep talking about this. And I want to mention that I'm hoping that you'll come back and that we talk again, because it's extremely important that we keep a focus. And in the era we live in now, it's really hard for people to keep a focus on anything. That's one of the dilemmas of the pandemic. But we'll keep talking, and I'm really grateful for the four of you coming. I also want to just take a chance, because I have 1 minute left or so. This event was really organized by Natalia Smaliuk and her colleagues at, Natalia's many things, and she wears many hats, but she also is very active in this Belarusian Canadian alliance, which as said, like, taps into this really dynamic diaspora. And one thing we've learned as historians is that, there's moments when diasporas really punch above their weight. And I think that's something, and I want to mention that Natalia and her team, which includes, and I'm just going to double check the names, Olya Ivanovskaya, Katya Reisberg, and Maria Markina, and we've been working together with them since this crisis started in Belarus, and I'm extremely grateful, and I will continue to work with them because they're very committed patriots, as Zina mentioned. And I thank all of you. I see Zina's hand up. I'm going to give Zina, if you guys don't mind, if you folks don't mind, I'm going to give Zina, because she's from Waterloo.
I think it's just a comment. I've got a few emails from people from our diaspora. They didn't receive they didn't receive my gosh, sorry guys, but nights do not help at my age. They didn't receive any data about today's event. And
Okay, Natalia and I will get on that, right? Natalia's muted, but if she could unmute for a second and maybe even show her face, you can put Natalia Smaliuk, who's working with me. There she is right there. So Natalia, for the next event, and I don't think it'll be that far off. And someone's, Valentina sending you a nice heart, by the way, if you want me to translate. So everybody have a great day. We're thinking about you. I think that's my most important message to all of you is we're thinking about you, and we wish you all the best, and we'll be talking to you very soon. And Natalia, let's follow up on this.
Absolutely.
thank you all.
Enjoy your days, your evenings, whatever's ahead of you. Okay?
Yeah.
And in Canada, stay safe.
Stay strong. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye,
Thank you,
everybody.
Natalia. Thank you, everyone, for inviting, for
Thank
arranging
you.
this meeting.
Thank you,
Have a
Robert.
nice day. Bye.
Take care.
Everybody.